it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see the strange sight, why the bush burned up. When the Lord saw that they had gone to overlook, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you stand is holy ground. Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God.
Good evening. You know, this has been one of the most difficult years since I've been here as far as sickness and death, and it's transferring over into 2014. And, you know, I look around on Sunday mornings, and I've noticed that our crowds have been thinner, much more than normal, and you get to asking yourself, well, why is that? And then you look around and you consider all the people who have been sick, who have been afflicted, and certainly that plays into it. It's been so rewarding to me, though, in the midst of all of the sickness and the death that we've had, to see our church family rally around individual members, to ask about members, to see how they're doing, to pay them visits. Last night I had the wonderful opportunity to be with the elders as they went to Sonny Shockey's house and prayed with her before she left this morning. And Sonny said something that I think we could all say or would hope to say in a similar situation. She said, it brings me so much peace to know that I have a great God and a great church family that are praying for me and looking out for me. Same was said by Eb Maxey as Lowell is going through some problems in the hospital. She said, yeah, I couldn't make it without you guys. And certainly we see God working in terrible situations and adverse circumstances. I don't believe He causes those things, but I certainly believe we can find Him during those times and that He helps us get through those things. Knowing that ultimately our main goal, our main focus is heaven, it's still very difficult living in this world. And so I'm thankful for a church family that rallies around its own when they're hurting and when they're in need, and we still have many that are. And so I hope that we will continue to do that and shower these folks with calls and cards and prayers and concerns on their behalf. As Ethan read a moment ago, we're looking at Exodus chapter 3 tonight, and really a few words there where Moses says, or God says to Moses, I should say, remove your sandals, for where you are standing is holy ground. If you like Westerns, you've probably seen the movie Shenandoah. If you remember that movie, Jimmy Stewart plays a guy by the name of Charlie, and in one scene that's rather popular nowadays, Charlie is sitting around the dinner table with his family. And what follows is one of the most selfish prayers ever uttered, to the point that it's almost humorous, right? But before that point, Boy Anderson walks in, and he sits down at the table. He's late, and he's sitting there, and everyone stops, and Charlie just glares at him. And if you remember that scene, the boy says, what did I do? And Charlie says, it's not what you've done, it's what you hadn't done yet. Boy, you need to take off your hat. And he says something to the effect of a boy that wears his hat at the dinner table is going to get nowhere in a hurry. And those of us who come from a simpler time, and I think I can even make that claim, who come from a time where our parents tried to instill respect and reverence, and I know we have parents that are still doing that today. We understand that there is a certain amount of respect involved with wearing your hat at the dinner table. You remove your hat when you say the Pledge of Allegiance or you sing the national anthem. There's just certain circumstances where you show respect in that manner, right? We understand that. We still cling to that in a lot of ways in certain situations. But what if I told you that when you come into the church building, not only do you need to remove your hat, you need to remove your shoes as well. Take off your sandals. Not because that the church itself is holy, because it's not, it's just a building. The carpet's not holy. But in a figurative sense, are we not standing on holy ground when we come to worship the Father on Sundays? I'm not going to advocate that you remove your shoes before you come in here in a literal sense. But I think figuratively, we need to understand the concept, and we need to understand what Moses was being told by God, is that you are standing on holy ground. You better be careful how you approach me. And I think that's been lost to some degree in this day and age. I think that the holiness of God is something that we don't always understand, grasp, or care much about. But we have to understand that when it comes to worshiping the Heavenly Father, this is holy ground. And therefore, as we talked about in the series to close out the year about worship, we need to understand that God defines the terms, that He sets the boundaries, and therefore we are standing on holy ground. We cannot traipse across this ground without ever thinking once about what God expects or wants from us, because it's all about Him. And as Ethan read a moment ago, Exodus 3, verses 1 and 6, if it's anything, it's an approach to God. It's a lesson in the holiness of God. I ask you a pretty simple question. What's the purpose of a house? I assume all of us here live in a house, or we live in a shelter of some kind. I was watching a program the other night, I don't remember the name of it, but it was showing unique houses or bizarre houses, the dwelling places that people lived in. And it was really interesting. Some of them had a house shaped like a UFO. One of them lived in a grain silo that they had converted into a house. Very interesting. And there are many beautiful houses here in Abilene. Many of you live in very aesthetically pleasing looking houses. But you know as well as I do that the number one purpose of a house is to provide shelter. And if it doesn't do that, it doesn't matter how pretty it is, right? It doesn't matter how beautiful to the eye your house is. If it doesn't provide shelter from the elements, then it's not that good of a house. A house has a purpose, just like other things in life have a purpose, just like you have a purpose. And you may be aesthetically pleasing to the eye from the outside. You may be able to do a lot of great things. You may be talented and able to do a lot of great things in life. But if you are not serving your ultimate purpose, then what are you really good for? God expects us to live for the purpose that we have been created. Peter reminds us of who we are. But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for God's own possession, so that you may proclaim the excellencies of Him who has called you out of darkness into His marvelous light. For you were once not a people, but now you are the people of God. You have received mercy. You had not received mercy, I should say, but now you have received mercy. We are a royal priesthood. What do we know about priests from the Old Testament? We know that they were the ones who offered up sacrifices. They were in charge of all the things pertaining to the sacrifices. Notice what Peter proclaims. He states that we proclaim the excellencies of Him who has called you out of darkness into His marvelous light. Certainly, worship is an avenue by which we do this, right? We are worshipers. God designed us to worship. The question is, are we functioning the way that God intended for us to function? As I said, Moses' first encounter with God was a lesson in holiness. It was a lesson, really, in how we are to approach God, and we all need to heed this lesson. When we come before our Maker, when we come before God, we must come with the right approach. We must come in reverence and in awe. We must come barefoot, knowing that what we are standing on is holy ground. In the Old Testament, worship by the patriarchs or by the priests were specific acts done at specific times, at specific places, by specific people. So this idea that worship is unregulated is completely and totally false. We see it from the very beginning. It was done by specific people at a specific time, at a specific place, and there were specific acts that were involved that had to be done the way that God had prescribed them. In Exodus chapter 30, beginning in verse 34, listen to what it says. It says, "Then the Lord said to Moses, take for yourself spices, stacte and onycha and galbanum, spices with pure frankincense. There shall be an equal part of each, and with it you shall make incense, a perfume, the work of a perfumer, salted, pure, and holy. You shall beat some of it very fine, and put part of it before the testimony in the tent of meeting, where I will meet with you. It shall be most holy to you. The incense which you shall make, you shall not make in the same proportions for yourselves. It shall be holy to you for the Lord. Whoever shall make any like it to use as perfume shall be cut off from his people." Worship was unique. The elements of worship were unique. This was not to be done at any other time or place, in any other way than at this time and place, and in the manner that God had prescribed. It was that unique. It was intended to be pleasing to God. Worship is still unique. There is a holiness, there is a reverence and an awe that we can't set aside. Moses received that law detailing how the children of Israel were to live and how they were to worship in a way that pleased God. In order to be assured that God would dwell among them, Moses was given explicit instruction on how God's people were to build that dwelling place. It was to be built after the pattern which was shown to Moses on the mountain. Having designed a place of worship which was known as the tabernacle, God then chose the tribe of Levi to be the people that would be the priest who would perform the functions in that tabernacle. Priest was one who offered the sacrifices, who was in charge of the different elements pertaining to those sacrifices. And these sacrifices were required for the atonement of the sins of the people, the imperfections of the people. And it was the responsibility of the priest to make certain that they were done properly and according to the pattern. The book of Leviticus means pertaining to the Levites, and it gives precise instructions detailing the duties of the priest and how they were to offer the sacrifices of worship. The priests were to be examples to the people in the area of holiness. God required them to be holy as He was holy. In fact, throughout the book of Leviticus, we see 87 references to the need for holiness. There is no question that worship in the Old Testament was essential to the welfare of the people. There is no question that these specific rules and regulations were given for a specific reason and purpose. They were to govern how worship was to be conducted. People were not free to worship in their own style, in their own manner. They were not free to make alterations to the divine injunction. If they did, there were consequences. In 1 Kings chapter 12, we see that Jeroboam changed the prescription for worship. He had 2 golden calves set up, one in Bethel and one in Dan. And he made sacrifices to them. He built houses on the high places and made priests from tribes other than that of Levi. He instituted a feast in the 8th month on the 15th day. But verse 33 really gives us the main motivation behind Jeroboam's actions. It reads, "Then he went up to the altar which he had devised in his own heart, and he instituted a feast for the sons of Israel and went up to the altar to burn incense." He devised it in his own heart. That's why he did it, because he wanted it. And that's never a good reason to come before God, to approach Him. If we approach Him in that way, then we have failed totally. Jeroboam worshiped God, but he worshiped Him in the wrong manner. And if you read throughout the Old Testament, he is the poster child of evil kings because he did what was evil in the sight of God by not following the divine injunction for how worship was to be done. God made the rules and He expected His people to follow. And we don't necessarily like that in this day and age. We don't much like to talk about following rules and regulations, maybe because we want to be our own authority. But you cannot escape the fact, you cannot argue the fact that the worship in the Old Testament was regulated, it was restricted, whether you like it or not, that's the way it was. And if you deviated from the divine plan, you would be stoned to death, right? And so we see that there were grave consequences for not following God's plan. Now, today there has been a change in law. There has been a change in the priesthood. There has been a change in the people. There has been a change in the place and the prescription of worship. Today, under the new law, every Christian is a priest. That privilege, this privilege is no longer limited to a certain tribe of people, but it can be enjoyed by all of those who are willing to follow God's Word. But in order to truly understand the essentialness of New Testament worship, we need to understand what it means when Peter says that we are a royal priesthood. 1 Peter 1, 14 and 16 reads, "As obedient children, do not be conformed to the former lust which were yours in your ignorance. But like the Holy One who called you, be holy yourselves also in all your behavior, because it is written, you shall be holy, for I am holy." Just like in the Old Testament, holiness and faithfulness are the keys to priesthood. In the New Testament, just like in the Old Testament, we are to be faithful priests. We are to follow the divine injunction as set forth as God has commanded. What was the primary activity of the priest in the Old Testament? Well, it was worship, right? And while the place of worship has changed, and the prescription of worship has changed, the necessity of worship has not. as Christians and as priests, it is still our primary responsibility to maintain that worship is done according to God's will. Today, there are acts of worship. Worship is not totally unregulated. There are acts of worship that God has authorized to take place within His church. These are not merely rituals that we engage in, that we don't ever really think about, or that we don't give our entire being to. These are acts of worship that require all of us to be engaged with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength. They have a beginning and an end. They happen at certain times and places, and they are to be done according to God's will. They're not, as I said, empty rituals. They are activities of devotion that come from the heart of one who seeks to worship Him with all of their heart. There are some who resist the idea of forms or acts of worship. Some feel that is too restrictive. However, regardless of our feelings on the matter, we see that the first Christians engaged in specific acts of worship that occurred at a location together with other Christians. This means that our neglect of these certain acts, these scriptural acts, our neglect of this privilege to worship even, is a direct violation of what God has commanded of us. What would have happened had the priest in the Old Testament decided, you know what, I don't want to worship this way any longer. I know what God said, but I've got a better way. What would have happened to them? Well, based on what we know and based on what is told there in Leviticus, we know that they would have paid severely for that type of attitude. Why should it be any different in the New Testament, although we won't be stoned, although we won't be struck dead immediately? Why should our attitude or our mentality change in any way over in the New Testament? If our heart is given to God first and foremost, will we not seek to worship Him in the way that He has commanded? Will we not seek His will in all things, rather than trying to do it our way, or rather than trying to make alterations because we feel that it would be better? I think the problem today is that worship does not receive the same significance, the same priority as it did in the Old Testament. Many times it's not just what we do here at church. Many times it's just choosing not to worship at all. Not realizing that choosing not to worship is sin. Notice I didn't say choosing not to come to church is sin, because you can come to church and not worship. That misses the point to say that if you don't come to church, that's sin. We always talk about, forsaking the assembly and all that. You can come to church and still forsake the assembly. Not worshiping God is sinful. We cannot neglect worship in the church that Christ established and purchased with His own blood. We cannot be a faithful child of God and not be a faithful worshiper of God. Again, we always turn to Hebrews 10:25, not forsaking the assembling together. Let's not view this passage in the negative. So many times that's how we view it. It's a fear passage. We throw it out there to say, you better be at church. Let's look at it from a positive standpoint. You get to come to church. You get to come and assemble with the saints. And there are many great benefits that come with that. Just in the verse prior to that, the Hebrew writer talks about how we can come together and provoke one another or stimulate one another to love and good deeds. There are great benefits to coming and worshiping together with the saints. God bless you. Plus, when we come together and we are really and truly engaged in worship, when we give our whole being to worship, when we grasp the significance of coming before a holy God and standing on holy ground, we are changed, aren't we? Something is different. And that's really the way that it should be, but so often we don't grasp that holiness. We don't think much of it. We come and we hope to get through as quickly as possible so we can get off to eat somewhere, or so that we can get on with the rest of our day. Worship so often is seen as a hindrance to our daily routine or our weekly routine. As I've said before, if you don't come to worship on Sunday, you get an extra Saturday, and that's very appealing to people, isn't it? Because so many times our Saturdays are filled now, if not with work, with something else, and we need another day to unwind. But if I have to get up and come to church, that blows that all out of the water, right? But I think those of us who are here tonight would say that There's much to be gained by being here. There is much to benefit from by coming together and worshiping with the saints. It's not about that I have to come to church. I get to come to church. I get to be here with my fellow brothers and sisters in Christ. Some would say, well, all of life is worship, so it's really not necessary for me to be here. I mean, really, all of life is worship, so I can worship God in many different shapes and forms in my life, whatever it is that I'm doing. My friends, that's not true. All of life is not worship. I know you've heard that a lot. You may have even heard it preached from the pulpit. All of life is not worship. If it were, then going to the bathroom would be worship. Murdering somebody could be considered an act of worship if all of life is worship. Committing sin could somehow be twisted as and seen as some sort of act of worship. All of life isn't worship, folks. So let's get that out of the way. Worship is unique. It means something. It must be done according to God's standard. There is a sense in which worship extends beyond the doors of the church building and consumes the life of a Christian. It is wrong to perceive Christianity as something that occurs at a building twice a week in an agreed upon time. That is wrong. Christianity extends beyond these doors, obviously. However, we cannot be a faithful Christian and decide not to worship in the church that the Lord established. While not everything in life is worship, for the Christian, worship is life. Let me say that again. While not everything in life is worship, for the Christian, worship is life. Romans 12, 1 and 2. Therefore, I urge you, brethren, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies a living and holy sacrifice, acceptable to God, which is your spiritual service of worship. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect. Notice that Paul makes a contrast here between the worshiper's living body and with that of a dead animal sacrifice. The animal is dead, but the Christian's body is alive. The worshiper is a holy being set apart for sacred use, while the animal is merely a physical thing. You notice also that the animal sacrifice was to be good and acceptable and perfect. The same applies to the conduct of us, the worshiper. Notice the inside-out change in lifestyle. It's a change from the profane to the holy, from death to life, from conforming to renewing. And notice the phrase spiritual service of worship. Translation comes from the Greek word latraein, which is a form of the word latreo or latreuin, the definition of which means to serve or worship cultically, especially by sacrifice. Just as the priest in the temple performed these acts of worship daily in the temple, we as God's priests should offer our lives as a daily sacrifice to Him. This is not the only place that Paul speaks about what we could term lifestyle worship. In Galatians 2 and 20, I recite it often because it's one of my favorite passages. He writes, I have been crucified with Christ. It's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. Philippians 2 and 17, he writes, but even if I am being poured out as a drink offering upon the sacrifice and service of your faith, I rejoice. Peter uses similar language in 1 Peter 2 and 5 when he writes, you also as living stones are being built up as a spiritual house for a holy priesthood to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. We see often that Paul and Peter used this sacrifice motif to show that a Christian's life is more than just being here at church, at a building twice a week at an agreed upon time, that it's a holy and consecrated life. They're not saying that every Christian should literally sacrifice their bodies or lay it upon an altar so that it can be consumed by fire. They're saying that a committed life of humble submission to God and to His service is our sacrificial offering. It's a lifestyle of obedient service that involves doing good deeds, serving our fellow man, all those things that we read about that go into making the godly character that we should all seek to have. Our lives must be about worship in the Lord's church and sacrificial service outside the Lord's church. Our life should be about both. The Hebrew writer puts it this way, chapter 13, verses 15 and 16. Through Him, then, let us continually offer up a sacrifice of praise to God. That is the fruit of lips that give thanks to His name, and do not neglect doing good and sharing, for with such sacrifices God is pleased. Here the Hebrew writer puts them both together. It's not just about worshiping inside, with the saints. It's also about going beyond the walls. It's about your spiritual act of service. It's about serving God in other ways outside these walls, namely by what we talked about this morning, seeking to save the lost, doing good deeds, seeking to exemplify Christian character, seeking to be holy as He is holy. The sacrifices that we offer to God are not dead animals. They're not cows or goats. The sacrifices that a Christian offers to God include both acts of worship in his church and a life devoted to doing His will. One is a sacrifice of praise. The other is a sacrifice of service. And as people who are God's own possession, we've got to be about both. I want to encourage you that every time you come through these doors, that you seek to worship God with all of your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Is it difficult sometimes in the way that we let our minds wander, we're tired, sometimes we're wrestling with kids? But let's do everything that we can to engage our entire selves in worship when we come through those doors. And when we leave those doors, let's do everything possible to exhibit spiritual service in the way that we live our lives through the week. You know, Albert Einstein was a genius, but many people said he was also very scatterbrained. That many times he would wear clothes that didn't match. His hair was often unkempt because he'd forget to comb it or brush it. One day he was on a train to go to a speaking engagement somewhere, and he sat down in his seat on the train, and he immediately immersed himself into his work. And the ticket taker came by and asked for his ticket, and Einstein couldn't find it. He said, "I'm sorry, I seem to have misplaced it." And he started searching all over, searching vigorously to see if he could find it. And the ticket taker said, "That's okay, Mr. Einstein. I recognize you. I know who you are. It's okay. I'm sure you had a ticket." And the ticket taker walks on by. A few minutes later, he looks, and Mr. Einstein's on the floor. He's looking under his seat. He's doing everything he can to find his ticket. And the ticket taker comes back over there, and he said, "Mr. Einstein, I told you you don't have to worry about it. I know who you are." And he says, "I know who I am as well, but I don't know where I'm going." And I think so many times we're that same way. I think so many times as Christians, we may know who we are, but we don't even know where we're going. We think we do. But when it comes right down to it, we're like that hamster on a wheel. We're just going around and around. We're tiring ourselves out, but we're really never getting anywhere. Do you know who you are? Peter says you are a people for God's own possession. Do you know where you're going? I hope you do, and I hope you're making strides to get there. And it starts with how we approach God. Be holy as He is holy. What a lofty ambition, but what a worthy goal. Maybe you haven't been living as you should, and you need the prayers and support of this church family. Let us help you. Maybe you've been struggling. Maybe you need to get back on track. We want to help you. If you're not a child of God, please make that decision tonight. Put on Christ in baptism as Lydia did this morning. Become a new creature in Christ. Whatever your need is, come now as we